The rain fell softly over Beijing, turning the city into a blur of lights and reflections. From the penthouse balcony, Wang Yibo stood still, hands resting on the cold glass railing, his expression calm but distant. To the world, he was untouchable, sharp, disciplined, composed. But tonight, something inside him was restless. Behind him, the door slid open quietly. Xiao Zhan stepped out, barefoot, wrapped in an oversized sweater that belonged to Yibo. His hair was still damp from a shower, the faint scent of soap following him like a memory. He didn't speak at first. He never needed to. After all these years, silence between them had its own language. "You're thinking too hard again," Xiao Zhan finally said, his voice gentle, teasing. Yibo turned, the corner of his lips lifting. "You always know." Xiao Zhan walked closer, resting his head against Yibo's shoulder. Below them, the city breathed, cars humming, lights blinking, life continuing as if nothing extraordinary existed above it. Yet right there, in that quiet space, two men who had survived storms stood together as husbands. Because yes, Wang Yibo and Xiao Zhan were married. Not loudly, not publicly, not the way fairy tales told it, but deeply, truly, permanently. Their story hadn't begun with certainty. It began with chaos. Years ago, when fame burned too bright and rumors cut too deep, they had stood on opposite sides of fear. The world watched their every move, dissected every glance, twisted every smile into speculation. What no one saw were the late-night calls, the quiet messages that said, "Are you okay?" The exhaustion hidden behind flawless performances. They had fallen in love slowly, dangerously slowly, like people who knew love could cost them everything. Back then, Xiao Zhan had been the first to step away. "I can't watch you lose yourself because of me," he had said, eyes shining with unshed tears. Yibo didn't beg. He never begged. He only nodded, jaw tight, heart breaking in silence. And so they separated, not in anger, but in pain. Years passed. They grew. They changed. They succeeded in ways that made headlines. Awards came. Crowds screamed their names. Yet every victory felt incomplete, like a sentence missing its final word. They met again by coincidence, or fate, on a charity project overseas. No cameras, no scripts, just two familiar souls in an unfamiliar place. At first, it was awkward, polite, distant. Then one night, during a blackout caused by a storm, they found themselves sitting on the floor, sharing a single candle between them. The shadows danced on the walls, and suddenly, all the years they had buried rose to the surface. "I never stopped loving you," Xiao Zhan whispered, as if saying it too loudly might break the moment. Yibo looked at him then, not as a star, not as a symbol, but as the person who had always felt like home. "Neither did I." That was the night everything changed. They didn't rush. They rebuilt trust brick by brick. They learned each other again, the scars, the fears, the strength that time had carved into them. Love, they realized, wasn't just passion. It was patience, protection, choice. When Yibo proposed, it wasn't grand. They were in a quiet mountain town, far from fame. Snow fell gently around them as they stood near a frozen lake. "I don't need the world to know," Yibo said, holding Xiao Zhan's trembling hands. "I just need you to stay." Xiao Zhan laughed through tears. "I've been staying in my heart all along." Their wedding was small. No reporters, no flashing lights, just close friends, warm laughter, and vows spoken with shaking voices. "I choose you," Xiao Zhan said, voice breaking. "I always will," Yibo replied. Marriage didn't make life easier. It made it braver. There were mornings when schedules clashed and nights when exhaustion turned into silence. There were arguments, real ones, about priorities, distance, and the weight of being watched even when hidden. But there was also comfort. Like the way Yibo brewed coffee exactly the way Xiao Zhan liked it without being asked. Or how Xiao Zhan always waited up, no matter how late, leaving a light on like a promise. On screen, they played characters who loved, fought, and sacrificed. Off-screen, they lived it. One evening, after a particularly brutal filming schedule, Yibo came home unusually quiet. Xiao Zhan noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked, setting aside his script. Yibo hesitated. "I'm tired of being strong all the time." Xiao Zhan didn't offer advice. He simply pulled Yibo into an embrace, holding him as the weight of years finally loosened. "You don't have to be strong here," he whispered. "You're safe." That was their marriage, not perfection, but refuge. Sometimes they escaped to the sea, wearing caps low over their faces, walking hand in hand like ordinary people. Sometimes they stayed home, cooking badly, laughing louder than necessary, dancing to old songs in the living room. In those moments, fame didn't exist. Fear didn't exist. Only them. Years later, standing on that balcony in Beijing, Xiao Zhan squeezed Yibo's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Choosing this life with me?" Yibo looked at him, really looked, at the man who had endured storms, faced judgment, and still loved with an open heart. "Every hard day," Yibo said, "is easier because it ends with you." Xiao Zhan smiled, eyes shining under the city lights. The rain slowed. The night softened. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, two souls who had once been afraid now stood unafraid, married not just by vows, but by everything they had survived together. Because some love stories aren't meant to be loud. They're meant to last. The morning light slipped gently through the curtains, painting the bedroom in pale gold. Xiao Zhan woke first, as he often did. He lay still for a moment, listening to the calm rhythm of breathing beside him. Wang Yibo slept on his back, one arm stretched out as if even in dreams he expected Xiao Zhan to be there. Xiao Zhan smiled softly. Marriage still felt unreal sometimes. Not because of doubt, but because of how peaceful it was. Carefully, he shifted, trying not to wake Yibo, but the movement was enough. Yibo's eyes opened slowly, dark and calm, instantly focused on him. "Morning," Yibo said, voice low and rough with sleep. "Morning," Xiao Zhan replied, brushing hair away from Yibo's forehead. "You were smiling in your sleep." Yibo frowned slightly. "I was." "Yes, that rarely happens." Yibo didn't deny it. He simply turned his head, pressing his face briefly into Xiao Zhan's palm, a quiet gesture of trust that still made Xiao Zhan's chest tighten. This was the part of Yibo the world never saw, the softness hidden beneath discipline and silence. They stayed like that for a while, letting the morning breathe around them. Then reality knocked. Schedules, meetings, flights, scripts. The outside world never paused for love. At breakfast, the television played muted news while Xiao Zhan scrolled through his phone. Headlines flashed briefly. Rumors, speculation, distant echoes of the lives they once lived loudly. He turned the screen off and looked at Yibo. "Do you ever feel like we're living two lives?" he asked. Yibo poured coffee carefully, the aroma filling the room. "We are," he answered honestly. "One for them, one for us. And you're okay with that?" Yibo met his gaze. "As long as this one is real." Xiao Zhan nodded. He understood. Their marriage existed in stolen moments, late-night calls, quiet apartments, handwritten notes left on the kitchen counter. It lived in patience, in restraint, in choosing each other again and again, even when distance tried to interfere. A few weeks later, they attended the same industry event for the first time since getting married. Not together, not publicly. The hall shimmered with lights and cameras. Xiao Zhan stood among other guests, smiling politely, his posture perfect. Across the room, Yibo leaned against a table, expression composed, unreadable. To anyone watching, they were just colleagues. But when their eyes met, briefly, carefully, something unspoken passed between them. "I'm here. I see you. I'm still yours." Later that night, back home, the tension finally broke. "You didn't look at me enough," Xiao Zhan teased, loosening his tie. Yibo raised an eyebrow. "If I looked too much, they'd notice." "So you were holding back?" Yibo stepped closer. "Barely." The laughter that followed felt like relief. Like release. Yet even love as deep as theirs had shadows. One evening, after a long shoot, Yibo returned home unusually late. Xiao Zhan was already awake, sitting on the couch, the room lit only by a small lamp. You didn't answer your phone, Xiao Zhan said quietly. Yibo stopped. I was in a meeting. At midnight. Silence stretched between them, not angry, but heavy. Xiao Zhan stood. I know this life. I chose it too. I just need honesty, even when it's hard. Yibo's shoulders dropped slightly. I was scared, he admitted. Scared that if you knew how much pressure there was today, you'd worry. Or worse, feel like you were the reason. Xiao Zhan stepped closer, resting his forehead against Yibo's chest. Don't protect me by shutting me out. We promised. Yibo closed his eyes. You're right. Marriage, they were learning, wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about sharing it. On their anniversary, quiet, unannounced, they escaped again. A small coastal town. No disguises this time. Just distance from noise. They walked along the shore at sunset, waves brushing their feet. Xiao Zhan picked up a shell, turning it over thoughtfully. If one day, he began slowly, the world finds out, are you ready? Yibo watched the horizon. I don't know when, or how, but I know who I'll stand with. Xiao Zhan smiled, eyes soft. That's enough. That night, as the sea whispered outside their window, they held each other without words. No promises needed. They had already made the biggest one. To stay, no matter how loud the world became. Back in the city, life continued at its relentless pace. But something had changed. They moved differently now, more grounded, more certain. Love had stopped being something they feared losing. It had become something they lived inside. And though their story wasn't written for headlines or applause, it was written into every quiet morning, every honest conversation, every shared breath at the end of a long day. This was part one of their forever. Not the dramatic reveal, not the ending, but the beginning of a love strong enough to survive in silence. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more emotional and cinematic love stories. Your support helps the channel grow, and your thoughts mean everything. Blue Heart Sparkles.